It's almost dawn on a cold October in Oakland, California, 1967. Suddenly, a young black man is pulled over by police officer John Frey. Within minutes, shots ring out in the darkness. When the gunfire stops, a police officer lies dead on the cold pavement. Another man staggers away, with blood seeping through his shirt. By sunrise, the FBI's most wanted list will have a new name at the top, a name that will soon be chanted in streets across America, a name that will make the powerful tremble and the powerless rise.
Bring it on. If you want war, let there be war.
When the party says power to the people, we ain't diving a pound. We say power to the people. I am a revolutionary.
I am not standing for violence, but I do stand for self-defense.
But to understand how this young man from Oakland would become the FBI's most wanted and why millions would take to the streets demanding his freedom, we need to go back. Let's start in Monroe, Louisiana, 1942. While the world was focused on World War II, Black Americans were fighting their own war right here at home, a war for survival in the American South. Monroe sits in Ouachita Parish, and if you were Black in Ouachita Parish, you lived with a target on your back. Between 1877 and 1950, this single parish saw 37 documented lynchings of Black people, the fifth highest total in the entire South. Think about that for a second. In an area smaller than most cities, 37 people were murdered by mobs just for being Black, and those are just the ones we know about. This was the world Huey Percy Newton was born into on February 17, 1942. His parents named him after Huey Long, Louisiana's former governor, a populist who, despite his complicated legacy, had actually done more for Black education than any Southern governor before him. But a name wouldn't be enough to protect young Huey from the reality of being Black in the South. The Newtons weren't about to wait around to become another statistic. Like millions of other Black families in what became known as the Great Migration, they packed up and headed west. See, between 1916 and 1970, over 6 million Black people fled the South. They were running from more than just the lynch mobs. They were escaping an entire system designed to keep them down. Jim Crow laws, segregation, poverty, voter suppression. The South had become a prison for Black Americans, and the Great Migration was their jailbreak. The Newtons landed in Oakland, California. But here's the thing about running from racism in America. It has a funny way of following you wherever you go. Sure, Oakland didn't have the lynch mobs of Louisiana, but it had its own ways of keeping Black people in their place. The Newton family was poor, but they were tight-knit. They moved around the Bay Area constantly, chasing affordable rent, but never went without food or shelter. But poverty wasn't what damaged young Huey the most. It was the education system. In his own words, Newton was made to feel ashamed of being Black. The Oakland public schools actively tried to break him. Here's what Newton wrote in his autobiography, Revolutionary Suicide. During those long years in Oakland public schools, I did not have one teacher who taught me anything relevant to my own life or experience. Not one instructor ever awoke in me a desire to learn more or to question or to explore the worlds of literature, science, and history. All they did was try to rob me of the sense of my own uniqueness and worth, and in the process, nearly killed my urge to inquire. Think about that. The school system's job is supposed to be educating kids, awakening their curiosity, preparing them for the future. Instead, they were doing the exact opposite, trying to crush a young Black man's spirit to make him feel worthless, to kill his desire to learn and grow. If you're interested in exploring Huey Newton's incredible story in his own words, check out his book linked in the description below. It's a compelling read that offers unique insight into his life and legacy. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn, because instead of breaking Huey Newton, this system created something it would later come to fear. All that suppression, all that attempted spirit crushing, it was like trying to contain a fire in a sealed room. Eventually, something was going to explode. In 1959, Huey Newton walked into Merritt College with a secret that would get most people laughed out of higher education. He was functionally illiterate. This meant that although he could read a little bit, it was a struggle. After graduating from Oakland Technical High School without learning this basic skill, Newton could have given up. He could have accepted what the system had decided for him. Instead, he did something that would shock even the most seasoned academics. To teach himself to read better, Newton didn't pick up children's books or basic texts. No, he chose his brother's copy of Plato's Republic, one of the most complex philosophical works ever written, a text that gives college professors headaches, a book that has challenged educated readers for centuries. At Merritt College, Newton's path crossed with Bobby Seale, a fellow student who would become his closest friend and intellectual partner. Like Newton, Seale was searching for answers to the deep-rooted problems facing Black Americans. Their discussions would stretch long into the night, questioning everything about the society they lived in. During this time, Newton joined the Afro-American Association. Under Donald Warden's leadership, the Afro-American Association was pushing for Black empowerment through education and political action. Newton became a prominent member, but he wasn't content with just attending meetings. He wanted concrete change. Working with other association members, he succeeded in getting Merritt College to adopt its first African-American history course, a revolutionary achievement in 1960s academia.
The program was a cultural program to institute ethnic studies, African studies and Afro-American studies. From the Afro-American Association, it's stemmed the SOUL Student Advisory Council, and that was the action group inside of the school. After we created the study classes, I felt that there was need to do other things to affect the wider community.
But Newton's college years weren't just about academic achievements. His relationship with the law started early, way before college. Growing up in Oakland, he'd been arrested several times as a teenager, including charges for gun possession and vandalism at just 14 years old. In mid-1964, at a party in Oakland, Newton's confrontations with the law reached a pivotal moment. What started as an argument over cultural nationalism quickly escalated into violence. When Odell Lee tugged at Newton's arm, Newton saw something that most people wouldn't understand, a facial scar that, to someone who grew up in the ghetto like Newton, marked Lee as a knife fighter. When Lee reached into his pocket, Newton didn't wait to find out if there was a gun. He grabbed a steak knife from a nearby table and repeatedly stabbed Lee. The court didn't buy Newton's self-defense claim. The conviction landed him in prison for 6 months. But here's what you need to understand about Newton's relationship with the law. In his autobiography, he explains that he was trying to transform what the system labeled as criminal activities into something political. Newton saw firsthand how the legal system was being used as a weapon against the Black community. Before taking criminal evidence in school, he wrote that he had no idea what my rights were. This understanding, or lack of it, shaped how he viewed his own run-ins with the law, and more importantly, how he would later approach the idea of Black self-defense.
The courts have only reflected the racist attitude of the general power structure, that I haven't received a fair trial, that I should not have been indicted in the first place. I was indicted by a blue ribbon grand jury, a middle-class white grand jury that did not represent a cross-section of the community.
See, Newton spent his time between classes in pool halls, bars, and anywhere else Black people gathered in Oakland. He wasn't just hanging out. He was learning about the real problems facing his community, learning about how the system worked against them, learning about what needed to change. While this street education was happening, Newton was feeding his mind with revolutionary ideas. He devoured the works of Karl Marx, learning about class struggle. He studied Vladimir Lenin's theories of revolution. He absorbed Frantz Fanon's analysis of colonialism, Malcolm X's fierce critique of white supremacy, Mao Zedong's strategies for resistance, Emile Durkheim's understanding of society, and Che Guevara's guerrilla tactics. Newton was synthesizing these revolutionary works with his real-world experience of Black life in America. He began developing what he called revolutionary humanism. Unlike many civil rights leaders who grounded their movement in religious faith, Newton sought concrete answers to social conditions. References to God or Allah, he wrote, did not satisfy my stubborn thirst for answers. By 1966, the man who had entered college unable to read would graduate with his associate's degree. But in those early college years, something more important than degrees was taking shape. Newton was developing a new way of thinking about revolution, about power, about justice, and soon he would put these ideas into action in a way that would shake America to its core. By the way, if you've enjoyed the content so far, leave a like and comment down below what topics you'd like to see covered next. We have so much history that needs to be told, and we're only just barely scratching the surface here. During the time of Newton's graduation, the civil rights movement was in full swing, but Newton and Bobby Seale were tired of waiting for change. They were watching police brutality ravage their community. They were seeing their neighbors trapped in poverty, and they were done asking politely for basic human rights. So in October 1966, Newton and Seale created something new, the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The name wasn't just for show. These weren't peaceful protesters singing hymns and turning the other cheek. The Panthers believed that black people had the right to defend themselves against a system that was actively trying to destroy them. Using the same determination that pushed him to learn reading through Plato's Republic, Newton brought that same energy to studying California's legal code. He spent countless hours in the law library, poring over every detail of California's gun laws. Backwards, forwards, sideways, and catty corners, as Bobby Seale would later put it. And then he found it, a legal provision that would change everything. California was an open carry state, meaning citizens could legally carry loaded weapons in public as long as they weren't concealed. Most people didn't know about this law. Most people wouldn't think to look for it. But Newton did. Newton was about to use the system's own laws against it. While other civil rights groups were focused on integration and voting rights, the Panthers took a different approach. They would patrol African-American neighborhoods, armed with both guns and law books. When police would stop a black person, the Panthers would show up, standing at a legal distance, making sure those cops knew they were being watched. And here's the thing, it was all perfectly legal. The cops couldn't do anything about it because Newton had done his homework. He knew exactly what the law allowed them to do. This wasn't some random idea they came up with. The Panthers took their inspiration straight from Malcolm X, who had been assassinated just a year earlier. Malcolm had preached about black people's right to defend themselves by any means necessary. Newton and Seale turned these words into action. As Newton wrote, "The party is a living testament to Malcolm's life work." They wore their signature black leather jackets and berets, both as uniform and statement, as if to say, "We aren't hiding, we're not afraid, and we're organized." Now, if you've seen any footage of the Panthers, you probably picture black leather jackets and firearms. That's exactly what the media wanted you to see. But here's what they didn't show you. The Panthers were feeding more hungry kids than some government programs. By 1971, the Panthers had set up over 60 survival programs across the country. Let that sink in. But they didn't stop at breakfast. The Panthers created medical clinics in neighborhoods where doctors feared to tread. Free sickle cell anemia testing at a time when the medical establishment largely ignored this disease that primarily affected black people. A busing program to help families visit their imprisoned loved ones. Legal advice seminars teaching black people their rights. Housing cooperatives for families who couldn't afford rent. Their own ambulance service, because regular ambulances often refused to serve black neighborhoods. And then there was the Oakland Community School. While the public school system was failing black children, the Panthers created their own solution. They established a school that provided high-level education to 150 children from the poorest neighborhoods in Oakland.
Basically, we needed education, we needed decent housing, we wanted fair treatments in the court, we wanted medical care, we wanted the availability for food and clothing for blacks.
But how do you tell your own story when the mainstream media is painting you as nothing but thugs with guns? Simple. You create your own media. The Panthers established their own newspaper, The Black Panther Party newspaper, which became one of the most widely distributed African-American newspapers in the country. Every week, Panthers would hit the streets, selling their paper for 25 cents a copy. While the mainstream press was focused on their weapons, the Panther newspaper was telling stories about their community programs, their political education classes, and their fight against police brutality. Think about this for a second. A group of young black people, most of them in their 20s, created a nationwide network of social programs that did more for their communities than many government initiatives. They built schools, fed children, provided health care, and created their own media empire. But this success would come at a price that would be paid in blood. 4:51 a.m. Officer John Frey spots what he calls a known Black Panther vehicle and radios in a license plate check. The car has outstanding warrants, but they're not in Newton's name. They belong to someone called Laverne Williams for parking violations. Frey pulls the car over. Something doesn't add up. The driver's identity doesn't match the vehicle's registration. What starts as a routine traffic stop is about to spiral into one of the most controversial shootings in Oakland's history. When Frey realizes the driver is Huey Newton, not Laverne Williams, he immediately calls for backup. Officer Herbert Hines arrives within minutes. What happens next would spark protests across America. By 5 a.m., shots had been fired. Officers Gilbert De Hoyos and Thomas Fitzmaurice respond to Hines's desperate call for help. When they arrive, they find a scene of chaos. Officer Frey is down with 4 bullet wounds. Hines is seriously injured with 3 bullet wounds. And Newton? He's nowhere to be found. At 5:50 a.m., Newton staggers into Kaiser Hospital with a bullet in his stomach. Dr. Thomas Finch and Nurse Corinne Leonard attend to him. According to their testimony, Newton is agitated and needs to be given a tranquilizer to calm him. Within minutes, he's handcuffed to his hospital bed and under arrest for Officer Frey's murder. Here's where things get interesting. Despite an extensive search, no gun is found on Newton or at the scene. The key witness testimony is full of contradictions. Hines claims the shooting started after Newton was already under arrest. Another witness claims Newton shot Frey with Frey's own gun during a struggle. But without a weapon, how could the prosecution prove who fired the fatal shots? Newton maintains that Frey shot him first, causing him to lose consciousness during the incident. The trial that followed was a masterclass in judicial bias. The judge's prejudice against Newton was so blatant, it was documented. The jury's racial composition? Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a jury of Newton's peers. Despite the lack of physical evidence linking Newton to the shooting, despite the contradictory witness testimony, despite everything, in September 1968, Newton was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. The sentence? 2 to 15 years. But the system had underestimated one thing: the power of the people. The Black Panther Party immediately began organizing what would become known as the Free Huey movement. On Newton's birthday, February 17, 1968, something unprecedented happened. 5,000 protesters gathered in Oakland demanding his release. This wasn't just another protest. This was a show of force that caught the attention of international news organizations. The Panthers formed a coalition with the Peace and Freedom Party, a majority white anti-war organization. This alliance wasn't just about freeing Newton. It legitimized the Panthers' cause while boosting their credibility among radical activists. Free Huey became more than a slogan. It became a battle cry. Buttons, t-shirts, posters, Newton's face was everywhere. As Black Panther Kathleen Cleaver put it, they were elevating Newton as a symbol of everything the Black Panther Party stood for, creating a living martyr. The movement's persistence paid off. In May 1970, the California Appellate Court overturned Newton's conviction and ordered a new trial. After 2 more trials ended in hung juries, the district attorney finally gave up. The Alameda County Superior Court dismissed all charges. Newton was free, but the incident had transformed him from a local activist into an international symbol of resistance against oppression. The system had tried to crush him. Instead, they made him stronger than ever. By 1971, Newton was ready to take the Panthers' message beyond American shores, and he was about to do it in a way that would grab international headlines. In late September 1971, just months before Nixon's planned visit to China, Newton made his move. Accompanied by fellow Panthers, Elaine Brown and Robert Bay, he embarked on what would become a transformative 10-day journey to communist China. What happened next sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. At every Chinese airport where Newton's plane touched down, thousands of citizens gathered in organized shows of support. They carried Mao's Little Red Book and signs declaring, "We support the Black Panther Party, down with U.S. imperialism," and "We support the American people, but the Nixon imperialist regime must be overthrown." But China had more planned than just public displays of solidarity. They arranged a series of high-level diplomatic meetings that put Newton at the center of international revolutionary politics. Face-to-face discussions with North Korea's ambassador, strategic talks with Tanzania's ambassador, critical meetings with delegations from both North Vietnam and the Provisional Revolutionary Government of South Vietnam. And then came the pinnacle. Not one, but two personal meetings with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai himself. One of these meetings included Mao's wife, Jiang Qing. This was China treating the Black Panther Party as a legitimate political force on the world stage. After experiencing China firsthand, Newton's perspective shifted. He described China as a free and liberated territory with a socialist government. This wasn't just diplomatic pleasantry. It marked a profound evolution in the Panthers' ideological direction.
Premier Zhou Enlai offered the solidarity of the Chinese people and support of the oppressed people of America. He offered solidarity with the Black Panther Party and also the prisoners, the political prisoners who are fighting for their freedom inside of prisons such as San Quentin and Attica.
Following Newton's return from China, the Black Panther Party began incorporating North Korea's Juche ideals into their platform. This philosophical shift would influence how the Panthers viewed self-reliance and independence in their struggle. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Newton's leadership was his own intellectual evolution. This was a man who had taught himself to read using Plato's Republic, who went on to earn his PhD in social philosophy from the University of California at Santa Cruz in 1980. His doctoral dissertation, titled War Against the Panthers, a study of repression in America, wasn't just academic exercise. It was a detailed analysis of how the federal government had responded to the Black Panther Party, examining the assassinations of Fred Hampton, Bunchy Carter, and John Huggins. But Newton's vision of an internationally connected, intellectually grounded revolutionary movement was about to face its greatest challenges. The system that he had challenged so effectively was preparing to strike back with devastating force. While Newton was building his movement, another kind of operation was taking place behind the walls of the FBI headquarters. J. Edgar Hoover had launched something called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. This wasn't your regular law enforcement operation. This was the FBI's secret weapon, designed with one purpose: to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize Black political organizations. COINTELPRO agents weren't just watching the Panthers, they were actively working to destroy them. They planted informants, spread false rumors, and even orchestrated conflicts between different Black power groups. Their methods ranged from illegal surveillance to outright assassination. This wasn't conspiracy theory. This was documented fact, exposed in 1971 when activists broke into an FBI office and leaked the files to the press. Even after COINTELPRO officially ended in 1971, the FBI's obsession with Newton continued. They kept a terrorism enterprise investigation file on him until 2007, 18 years after his death. Think about that. They were so afraid of Newton's influence that they continued investigating him long after he was in the ground. Then came August 6, 1974. On an Oakland street, a casual exchange turned deadly. According to prosecutors, 17-year-old Kathleen Smith, a child prostitute, made the fatal mistake of calling Newton Baby, a childhood nickname he hated. Hours later, she was shot, and she would die from her wounds 3 months later. But here's where it gets complicated. The main witness to Smith's murder refused to testify after someone tried to assassinate her. Without this testimony, 2 separate juries would deadlock, unable to reach a verdict. That same year, Newton found himself facing another charge. This time, it was for allegedly pistol whipping his tailor, Preston Callens, over a dispute about the price of a suit. Newton posted bond after the arrest, but the charges kept piling up. Newton maintained these charges were fabricated, part of a larger conspiracy to destroy him and the Panthers. And given the FBI's documented history of targeting black leaders, his paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded. After all, this was the same FBI that had sent Martin Luther King Jr. a letter encouraging him to end his own life. The same FBI that had played a role in the assassination of other Black Panther leaders. The system that had tried to crush him before was back for round 2. But this time, they weren't just coming at him with guns and badges. They were coming at him with paperwork, with witnesses, with the full weight of the legal system. And that's when an unlikely ally emerged from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Bert Schneider, the producer behind Easy Rider, was about to pull off one of the most audacious escape plans in American history. Schneider's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He created a fake production company and announced a non-existent film called The Big Cigar, starring none other than Huey P. Newton himself. It was the perfect cover. Who would suspect that a Hollywood film production was actually an elaborate escape plan? With Schneider's help, Newton made it to Cuba in 1974. For the next 3 years, he would live in exile, watching from afar as his influence over the Black Panther Party began to fade. In 1977, Newton made a decision that would shock everyone. He came back to face the charges, back to fight the system one more time. And initially, it seemed like he might win again. The charges were either dropped or ended in acquittals. But then came the blow that would help bring everything crashing down. In 1982, Newton was accused of embezzling $600,000 in state aid meant for the Oakland Community School, the very institution that had been a crown jewel of the Panthers' community programs. The charges would hang over him for years, finally ending in 1989 when he pleaded no contest to a single count of cashing a $15,000 state check for personal use. But by then, the damage was done. The Black Panther Party had dissolved in 1982, torn apart by internal conflicts and external pressure. The man who had once stood toe-to-toe with the system was now fighting a different kind of battle against cocaine and addiction. The revolutionary who had inspired millions was struggling just to keep himself together. August 22, 1989. The streets of West Oakland are quiet. It's the kind of quiet that makes people nervous. Around the corner of 9th and Center Street, an argument breaks out. On one side stands Huey Newton, age 47. On the other, a 24-year-old member of the Black Guerrilla family named Tyrone Robinson. Words are exchanged. Then shots ring out in the darkness. When police arrive at 1456 9th Street, they find Newton lying on the pavement in the Prescott neighborhood of West Oakland. No weapon is found on him or anywhere at the scene. Within days, 24-year-old Tyrone Robinson is arrested. His story? Self-defense, but there's more to it than that. Robinson later reveals his real motive. He wanted to make a name for himself in the Black Guerrilla family, a notorious prison gang. In 1991, Robinson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 32 years to life. His next parole hearing won't be until November 2028. Today, that bloody street corner has been transformed. The spot where Newton fell is now marked as Dr. Huey P. Newton Way. In 2021, the city of Oakland erected a bronze bust of Newton near the site of his murder. It's a reminder of how far things had fallen. The man who had once dined with Chinese premiers, who had built schools and clinics, who had inspired a generation to stand up and fight back, died on a dark street corner in the very city where his revolution began. But Newton's story doesn't end there. His legacy, both the triumphs and the tragedies, would continue to influence generations of activists and revolutionaries to come. In August 1989, Oakland came to a standstill. The streets that had witnessed Newton's rise, fall, and ultimate death now filled with mourners coming to say their final goodbyes. The numbers alone tell a story. Inside Allen Temple Baptist Church, 1,300 people packed every available space. Outside, another 500 to 600 stood in respectful silence, listening to the service through speakers. Rich and poor, young and old, they came to honor a man who had changed their city forever. The service wasn't focused on how Newton died, but on how he lived.
When I first came to the Bay Area from Chicago, I was appalled at the way the police were oppressing black people in the ghetto. And the only man who had the guts to stand up was Huey P. Newton, along with his associate Bobby Seale. I was very proud of his actions. I thought that Martin Luther King taught us how to pray and how to arouse the conscience of our oppressor. And I thought that Huey P. Newton taught us how to stand up to our oppressor. And for that, I think he should be accorded a national holiday.
Speakers celebrated his civil rights achievements and his revolutionary vision. They remembered the programs he built, the children he educated, the families he helped lift out of poverty. But there was another side to Newton that few people knew about, a side that only emerged after his death. In the archives of Stanford University lies a treasure trove of Newton's unpublished works. Dozens of essays, carefully crafted but never shared with the world, reveal the depth of his intellectual pursuits. These writings cover an extraordinary range of subjects: philosophical examinations of power and resistance, deep analyses of political theology and its role in liberation, studies of evolutionary biology and its social implications, detailed critiques of political economy and systemic inequality. Today, as new generations discover these writings, Newton's ideas continue to evolve and influence. His theories about community organization, his strategies for building alternative institutions, his vision of resistance through creation rather than just confrontation. These concepts resonate with modern movements in ways he could never have imagined. The true measure of Newton's legacy isn't just in what he accomplished in his lifetime, it's in how his ideas and strategies continue to inspire those fighting for justice today. In every community program, in every grassroots organization, in every movement for Black liberation, echoes of Newton's vision remain. As the young revolutionary who taught himself to read through Plato's Republic transformed into a scholar, activist, and community leader, he showed that true revolution isn't just about changing systems. It's about changing possibilities, about showing people what they can achieve when they stand together, organize together, and fight together. If you want to learn about another one of the Black Panther Party's most influential figures, check out our video on Fred Hampton, the Black Man Too Dangerous for America. This was Black Stories Untold, and as always, thanks for watching.